I'll talk a few minutes about my research, but do not hesitate to interrupt when something is unclear. So I have been very interested in conspiracy beliefs because of the criticism that I got that when you study political parties and you suggest that people vote for political parties because they agree with the policies of these political parties, and basically you're looking at the congruence between policies that parties propose and opinions of voters, people started telling me, well, that's not how politics works, because people have all kinds of ideas about the world, all kinds of fears and anxieties, and those matter. And so I started to work with a colleague of mine, Jan-Willem van Prooijen at the Vrije Universiteit, to see if we could include those questions about that sort of non-policy driven views of the world. And particularly, I got interested in how conspiracy belief is related to political orientations. We're not going to talk too long, but I am going to talk especially not too long about what are conspiracies. We can talk about that later, because there's a very interesting pattern, of course. Who believes in conspiracies? We can talk about that later. That's a good debate, and why that is so. And I'm going to show you a few things that we found out that I think are interesting enough. And I'm going to focus on particularly the cognitive dimension, because I'm very interested in how this cognitive mechanism works and how basically conspiracy beliefs are a sort of compensatory conviction. It's a sort of shortcut for people to understand the world around them when confronted with high levels of complexity that they can't really grasp. And basically what you can see that people who are more fearful, who experience more anxieties, they are more likely to look for epistemic clarity, simple solutions, immediate answers, because they feel threatened. And so conspiracy beliefs are actually a sense-making mechanism of people coping with what they perceive as an evil outside world. And the big debate in conspiracy belief is, and what I focus on, which is political orientation, because I'm a political scientist, so that's what I'm interested in, is that there's basically two dominant theories. One comes from the United States, and they argue, people like Joss, they argue, well, it's basically right-wing, conservative, religious people who are most conspiratorial because they have the most anxieties, they fear the world most, they are more stressed by society than liberals and moderates, and that's why you see this ideological rigidity at the right, and it's asymmetrical, this belief in conspiracy belief. It's the right and right extreme particularly that have very high levels of conspiracy belief, versus what I call left-right symmetry is what I and Jan-Willem van Prooijen have argued since the beginning of our research, that it's not the direction of the ideology, but it's the intensity of the ideology. It's the extremism of your beliefs that makes you conspiratorial. Why would only right-wing extremists be conspiratorial? We thought that it's also left-wing extremists that are conspiratorial. And it's true that it just shows that right-wing people, especially in the United States, but also elsewhere, they are more fearful, they are more authoritarian, they're often more close-minded, more dogmatic, especially if they're religious. They're more out-group derogatory, so there's more groups that they think have a bad influence of society or shouldn't be there. They're also more prejudiced against certain groups like women, gays, non-believers. But we didn't see any reason why extremists on the other side would also not be suffering from a similar kind of psychological predisposition to basically fear the other, derogate the other, and see the world as a very threatening thing, and then also reducing complexity. And so we introduced basically an idea that Engelhardt already put forward in the 80s, that it's not the direction of the ideology, but it's the strength of the ideology, the strength of your beliefs that makes you conspiratorial. And so we argue for left-right symmetry. All extremists are more conspiratorial and more close-minded than political moderates. And that's what we started to research already in, say, the early 10s. We started to field data sets. One of our most cited article is from 2015, where we found that basically both the left and right extremes are more conspiratorial than others. And what we did there in that research is that we actually assumed from the idea that left and right would be different, and that's why we actually had a list of conspiracy beliefs that were related to finance. This was also because of the financial crisis, and we would assume that the left would be more prone to believe in financial conspiracies, i.e. blame bankers and CEOs and large companies, and that the right would be more conspiratorial about climate, because that's a hoax, it's invented by professors and researchers, and there is no global warming. And we also asked for belief in simple solutions, because we also wanted to test this idea that that conspiracy belief is related to complexity reduction. So to keep it basically simple, we fielded first a small study in the United States, and we could indeed show that extremists are more conspiratorial than moderates. And we were surprised that you could not see more sort of financial conspiracy belief on the left. Our assumption was that the left would be more conspiratorial about finance and banking, and they were not. The right-wing extremists were as conspiratorial about finance and bankers and banks creating the economic crisis as was the extreme left. On climate, we did find what we thought was supposed to be expected, and that is that the right wing is far more likely to think that climate change is a hoax and that it's all invented by liberals and left wing. And we then tested also this idea that related to conspiracy belief is that both extremists would also be more open to simple solutions for complex problems. So we had an item set of conspiracy belief, but also belief in simple solutions. And with the correct policies, most societal problems can be solved easily, things like that. And we did a second study, actually 2 studies in the Netherlands during the election, one on a probability sample and one on a non-probability sample. And both show, again, had this pattern, namely that indeed belief in conspiracies and belief in simple solutions is actually higher on the extremes than they are in the political center, with political moderates. But some conspiracy, especially climate, is indeed asymmetric, and that the right believes it more. And we found this over and over again. So what we did is we also tried to replicate it in larger studies. So recently, all this endeavor ended up in a publication in Nature Human Behavior. You see there's a lot of people involved because we collected data in a lot of countries. And again, we show this, this pattern that conspiracy mentality is higher at both political extremes. And it doesn't matter what you control for education. And also here we controlled what we call control deprivation. So people normally are more conspiratorial when their party or the party that they favor is not in power. But even when you control for that, then still people on the most both extreme sides are more conspiratorial than others. There's also always a bleep in the middle. And we explain that by the fact that people who are very conspiratorial think that they're very normal and then place themselves in the middle of a scale when you do self-placement. It's very interesting. If you do an objective scale, so you let them fill out policy beliefs, they end up really at the extremes. But when you let them place themselves, a lot of conspiracy extremists think they're normal, mainstream, and they place themselves in the middle. Very interesting. So this is very clear curvilinear effect. Nevertheless, we thought, well, there might be something in the fact that, yes, both extremes are more conspiratorial than moderates, but there might be a typical left-wing and a typical right-wing type of conspiracy belief. So we tried again, and we thought, let's focus on refugees and immigrants, of which we know that the right wing is more derogative and negative than the left. So we wanted to see if there's a similar mindset on both extremes in terms of conspiracy belief, but when you probe it in a way that it's about a refugee crisis rather than an economic and a climate crisis, you might get a different pattern. And what we could see is that, and here again, we wanted to also test this idea of simple solutions. And so we had three question sets that we put forward to all the respondents, and one would be a left-wing solution for the crisis, immigration crisis that was in 2014-15 clear in Europe, and that is all refugees should be allowed to stay. The left argues nobody is illegal, so all refugees should be allowed to stay. The left wing agrees with that, the right wing disagrees with that. If you say all refugees must leave the country, you get the opposite effect. You get that the left says no, that's nonsense, and the right says yes, perfect, let's do that. When you say the solution to the refugee crisis is simple, you see again that both extremes think that the world is more easy, problems in the world are more easy to solve than people in the political center. So moderates see more complexity in the world. What we also started to do is to look at how these extremists reason. And we asked them for judgmental certainty. So we asked them, how sure are you about your judgments? And then you can see that people on both extremes show a very high judgmental certainty. They're very much convinced about their own convictions, about their own policy solutions. They overestimate, they're overconfident in their own political judgments, whereas people in the center, political moderates, are usually far more careful with saying that I know how things are done and how you should run the world. And so we tested this further by looking at more different outgroups. So not only immigrants, but we thought let's have a wider range of left-right differences. So let's think about groups that the left doesn't like and the right doesn't like. And so we're going to ask people, do they have a positive or negative contribution to society? And we thought that typical right-wing prejudice would be against Muslims, immigrants, homosexuals, gays, gypsies, unemployed, bureaucrats, intellectuals, environmentalists. And the left usually dislikes, has prejudice against Christians, bankers, hunters, business people, military, police, repressive apparatus of the state, things like that. So we had a list of these categories, and we asked them, do they have a good or negative, positive or negative contribution to society? And what you then get is that you indeed get, again, this pattern had a curvilinear pattern that on both extremes, left and right extremes, they are both more derogatory about groups, so they think more groups in society have a negative impact on both extremes, and political moderates are far more tolerant, less derogatory about groups in society. But here you see a little bit of the asymmetrical, because on the right there's far more outgroup derogation than on the left. So we wanted to explain why that is, and one of the explanations is this idea that people become extreme and conspiratorial because of economic fear and society. So we fielded also a 13-item, very broad range of possible fears that people could have about the future of their country and the world. There's no more pensions when I'm old, globalization threatens our security, we will not have enough money later to have good income, worried about the future, there will be chaos, there will be food shortages. It's a terrible word, basically. And again, you see the curvilinearity. And so now over, say, 5, 6, 7 years, we constantly find this curvilinear relationship. We also do find some asymmetry. So we do find some right wing on the right extreme, a little bit more negativism about society, a little bit more fear, but mostly it is curvilinear. And so the left and right extremes have a similar level of intolerance, which we also tested in an article that we used a Dutch item set, which is about basically your dogmatic intolerance. So the thing that you are right, if everybody would think about it, they would have my opinion. How I feel about issues is the truth. It scares me if people think differently than I do. So this is this idea that you know better than others, And here you also see a small effect that on the both extremes, indeed, they are more dogmatic, more intolerant than in the political center. So there is, we think, far more evidence of this rigidity of the extremes, so more symmetric than asymmetry. And so we would like to say that Jost is not wrong, but he is overestimating the idea that it's only the right wing. And we've written an article, I'm not going to go into it, but sort of explaining the psychological mechanism about why these people on the extreme have this mindset. And we basically say, well, it's this distress, this anxiety that creates an extreme outlook. They like the simplistic black and white perception of the social world. They're really, basically, it's a moral system. It's a moral judgment. And the world consists of good and bad, and these two are very easy to detect from one another. This also, because of the simplicity, makes them very overconfident in their own judgment. They think the other people are wrong or just simply don't understand what's going on. And that makes them also less tolerant towards the others, because these people just don't understand what's going on and they are the ones to see it. And that's why you often see that extremists, but also conspiracy believers, overclaim their own knowledge. They claim that they can see things that you and I not see. We are sheeple and we are just stupid. We cannot see what's really going on, but they claim that they have insights that we don't have. And then it got worse when we started to go into deeper, because this overclaiming of knowledge basically predicts that they go against the establishment, even if the establishment is on their side. So there was a beautiful opportunity in the Netherlands where we held a referendum on Ukraine. Ukraine wanted to join with the treaty, the European economic space, and the Dutch held a referendum on that. And this was a beautiful opportunity because we knew that nobody would know what is in that treaty, because normal voters do not read treaties. So we could test how much knowledge would actually impact on their voting behavior in this election, referendum, because they would not know what is in there. And we departed from this idea that this overclaiming of knowledge had this very high level of confidence they can judge about politics is basically the Kruger-Dunning effect. They are incompetent, but because they are incompetent, they don't know they are incompetent. They just don't see that they are incompetent because they don't have the cognitive abilities to see through their own ignorance. So what we did is we fielded a study in the Netherlands during this Ukraine debate, where we asked them how much they perceive their own knowledge. So I consider myself very well to judge. I know a lot about this. I'm very capable of judging things. When I'm in politics, I can understand it. And we also included statements that are actual knowledge. So what's in the treaty. And we measured, of course, the timing, because we didn't want them to look it up. We wanted to tell us immediately. And what we did, and this is very interesting, is that we did knowledge overclaiming. So this is a trick that psychologists used. They basically put 12 or 20 items in there, and 4 or 8 are made up. So we made up metatoxide, quincha, took people that don't exist, concepts that don't exist, and we asked them, how much do you know about it? How sure are you that you know a lot about it? But basically we can make by this a bullshit factor, because they actually claim knowledge on things that don't exist. We made them up at the VU, in the room, we made up all kinds of stuff. And of course we looked at whether they vote for anti-system part, so against or in favor of the treaty. And you see that the more people are voting against the treaty, the more they think they can really judge. So they have a very high self-perception of knowledge. But it's also at the same time true that their actual knowledge of what's in the treaty diminishes with the tendency to vote against the treaty. And there's a positive relationship between the tendency to vote against it and the overclaiming. So basically what you see here is that people overestimate their own ability to judge. They actually know less, but they are more convinced they are right. And that makes them very anti-establishment. And so there's a clear element in conspiracy belief and extremism where extremists and conspiratorial mindsets basically reduce complexity, and they become very convinced about this very simplistic worldview that they have. And that's why we think there's a relationship between populism. So this is the last thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to show the link between this and populism that we did. So extremism, populism, and conspiracy beliefs are related, because we think that it's related through this feeling of control deprivation, that you're powerful, and there's powerful people out there that run the world, and you, as a normal person, have nothing to say. You're anti-establishment, we just showed this. They're anti-expert, anti-intellectualism. We are often seen as part of the problem as academics. They're pro-common sense, so they claim that what they think is actually, everybody else thinks that. We just don't acknowledge it, but everybody else actually thinks what we think. That is always one of the arguments. And they believe in simple and immediate solutions and out-group derogation. So we think these are all related. And we did a study which we call populist gullibility, where we wanted to see, and our original assumption was, so people who are conspiratorial and extremist and populist will reject traditional information from mainstream news outlets. And we also know that populists also see a threat to the nation, because elite groups from the outside, they run the show, and especially in the EU, Brussels is a sort of colonization power of our democracies. And so what we did a study in the UK and Germany, where we let people read a block of a so-called US citizen, and one was conspiratorial, and the other one was neutral. And then we asked them agreement with the text. And we asked EU conspiracy theories, but populist attitudes at the national level. And we also asked about xenophobia, things like meeting immigrants makes me feel uncomfortable. And what we can clearly see that agreeing with conspiratorial beliefs actually predicts also populist attitudes. And the more you have populism, also the more you have conspiratorial beliefs. And it also links very closely with xenophobia. The more you agree with the conspiratorial narrative in the text, the more you're also xenophobic. And so we could clearly link now conspiratorial beliefs, extremism, and populism as a sort of general mindset that has a very interesting element of how this cognitive mechanism works in the brain. And we thought, so how can we explain this? And we departed from the idea is that populists will not like information that is incongruent with their own beliefs. So they will reject any information that doesn't fit their own thinking. They will reject it. And this uncritical mindset makes them susceptible to this populist appeal. And our idea is that they will believe basically alternative news, people who talk like them, who think like them, and they will not believe the legacy mainstream media. But we found something completely different. What we did, we basically showed them a similar text, both with a traditional news heading, NBC News, and then an alternative, but exactly the same. So it was a neutral text about the lottery winners and just neutral text. But then we just manipulated whether it's mainstream or not. And we wanted to see what happens there with people who are populist and extremists. And the initial hypothesis, like I said, was that populists, extremists, and conspiratorial believers would think that the established source, so they would less believe these traditional mainstream legacy media. However, what we found was far more interesting, I think. Basically, what we found is that outside their fixed mindset, people who are conspiratorial, extremists, and populists actually cannot distinguish the quality of information. They believe everything in an equal way. Yes, they believe more when it's conspiratorial. Yes, they believe more when it's congruent with their own ideas. But all the other things are basically equal to them. So we also included what we call bullshit receptivity. Bullshit receptivity is very funny. I love my colleagues in psychology. It's an idea that Penny Cook worked on a lot, and it is the extent to which people perceive deeper meaning in things that are completely empty, completely BS, completely made up. We basically make sentences online. We make sentences that don't mean anything. They're grammatically correct, but they're totally BS. So hidden meaning transformed unparalleled abstract beauty. And then we ask people, do you see meaning in that? What does that mean for you? Do you understand what that is? And so we generated a lot of these sentences, and we could see that actually when you are the more populist you are, the more receptive you are to bullshit, the more you see meaning in things that are completely empty. So people just basically put their own meaning into emptiness, and they fill basically the space always with their own convictions. And so we thought, okay, let's take this further. Let's also put supernatural belief in them. Can you talk to dead people? All kinds of horoscopes that, of course, predict the future, and you should be guided by this in your life. And also there, they do not distinguish. They also go along with supernatural beliefs. And so basically we think there's quite some evidence that this populism, conspiracy belief, extremism is very much a psychological cognitive mechanism where basically these people are gullible. They have little filter or a weak filter to filter out highly qualitative logic, substantiated evidentiary facts. For them, there's a fixed idea of how they see the world, and everything out there has an equal level of truth in them. And even if it's total bullshit, if it's supernatural, UFOs, whatever, they don't distinguish between that type of information. They believe everything, except for the things they're very convinced that's absolutely true, and that's not to be shaken. And so we find basically this combination of gullibility versus rigidity, we think is an answer to understanding more about how populism, extremism, and conspiratorial beliefs work in this world.
Well, thank you very much, André. We have lots of specialists dying to ask you questions, attack you. So whose hand is up first? Let me see. Yilmaz, please.
Yilmaz, you are still muted.
You are muted. Yilmaz?
Yes, okay.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to attack our distinguished speaker. I'm going to thank him for this really, really interesting presentation. And by some coincidence, it's along the lines that I was hoping to design a research here about conspiratorial theories and, where they originate and what kind of people, etc. The reason is we had another devastating earthquake back in 1999. And after that, the American ambassador, the US ambassador in Turkey said, Turkey is the only country where we had to convince people that we don't make earthquakes in the United States, because it was a widespread conspiracy that it was an American doing, okay? And now exactly the same thing is happening. Many people,
ambassadors lie.
Even the taxi driver that I was talking to this morning said, there's no doubt about it, that it's Americans are behind this thing. It's not a natural disaster. It's man-made and American-made. Now, I can't give you any proportions about how widespread it is, but I was wondering if it would be correlated, for example, with certain personality traits, like the Big Five, maybe. And I was wondering if André has any information on that. And another question would be, some societies, I feel, are more conspiratorial than others. Do you have any insights on that? Again, thank you very much.
You are muted, André. Oh.
Should I immediately answer, or we are taking more questions?
Yes,
or?
please, because...
Okay. So can I take the last point earlier, because that's, I think, a very interesting one. And so what, for example, we found is that so there are several groups that are more conspiratorial than that. So minority groups are very conspiratorial. We did a survey in the Netherlands among 500 Muslims, and we found that a very interesting pattern was emerging there. They were 4 times as conspiratorial as the average Dutch respondent. And we found that the effect of education was reversed. So normally it's like lower education means more conspiratorial belief. Among this minority group, who were mostly Turkish Muslim voters for the party DENK, they actually had 4 times more conspiratorial belief, and it increased with education. Our story is that the more higher educated you are in the Netherlands, the more discrimination you experience, and the more you are aware of this kind of stuff going on in society. And so they had a high education, so they see that Jan and Klazien both had the same education at university, get a job, and then Yilmaz doesn't get the job. So Yilmaz becomes far more conspiratorial and think, this city, this country is working against me. And so we see that the stress that minorities develop in societies can lead to higher levels of conspiracy belief, and the belief that the system is rigged against you. So I would assume that in South Africa, the white minority population would be far more conspiratorial than the black majority population. That would be one of my hypotheses. But there would also be, of course, an idea that because the minority has been in power for such a long time, that there might actually be a remnant, or a very big remnant, of conspiracy belief that they're still in power among the majority population. And so there would be beautiful hypotheses, I think, in South Africa, in this pattern of who would be more conspiratorial than others. The other thing that was interesting in your, I think, in your question, which I cannot completely answer, but what is in terms of what personality traits are associated with it? Well, clearly paranoia. Very clearly paranoia is strongly associated with conspiracy belief. But what we know, for example, is that people who are more conspiratorial see far more agency than structure. So structure is usually seen by people who are highly educated, who like complexity, who like to see the structure and understand different structures like banking systems and economic systems. And so they see structure and structural effects. People who cannot see that are more likely to think that people do this, secret services do this. So they see far more agency. And also, they see far more connections between those agencies. So we call them pattern seeking. What we found in research is that people who are more conspiratorial and extremists, they draw lines between things that happen that are not very logic. But they connect it. So they see an earthquake and they think, oh, that's a secret service. And for another person, and we know how tectonic plates work and how the earth is structured and how crusts are sometimes thinner and overlapping, and we think that that is the reason. But that's structure, that's knowledge. People who are conspiratorial will see agency there. And even if you say, yeah, but it's tectonic plates and it's layers and thickness, and say, yeah, but you can move them. You can detonate them, and you can influence them, and who knows that they don't have lasers, or anyway, they'll come up with something that the Americans are still behind it.
Were you talking to my taxi driver this morning also?
No, not to your taxi drivers, but let me
Because
tell you, if you want another trade of people that are highly
exactly what
conspiratorial,
he was
taxi
telling
drivers. Taxi drivers, people who sell things at markets, they are the best to talk about conspiracy belief. They overestimate their knowledge of people. They are very convinced that they understand humanity far better than anybody else.
One question to Damien, please. Are you going to put this online?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, I've been recording and we'll upload.
Because I would like to go over and over it.
And we have another hand up, that's Hans Dieters.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for this extraordinary and widely encompassing talk that you gave. It gives you all kinds of ideas, and I have to cut back what's in my mind. But I have two questions. The first question is, have you ever tried to test availability at the supply side? I mean, the availability of political theories or generalized ideas in societies, and how they are then used in this game that you have described. Because in Europe and let's say the Americas, we have the left-right dimension, and it is widespread. And what it does and what it should do is to allow you a specification and re-specification of what happens in society, and also some prediction about what will happen in the future. So these ideologies, even in its if you don't be a specialist in the area, gives you some power to understand the world in a particular way. And I think what I would like to see is to test your ideas in a society where, let's say, the left-right dimension is not so widespread, and whether or not it is true that if these other societies have a supply of, let's say, Alltagstheorien, as we would say, of theoretical ideas that would allow people to specify how things are in their society and re-specify it, because left-right, very generalized level. So this is one question I would have. The other is relatively simple. I mean, you have so many scales that you have applied in your research. Did you ever throw in a scale of ambiguity of tolerance of ambiguity? I mean, this is in a way the other side of how you can approach to understand the world and cope with it. And it would be a wonderful addition if you could show evidence that the more you go to the center, that the more you find that people are tolerant of ambiguity. And I have a footnote, and then I stop. My footnote is we have done elite studies in the German parliament. And this is quite some time ago, but I did an interview there, and we wanted to get at how these members of parliament would react if you give them false information. So I talked about military strategies, and I had people from the Committee of Defense, and I asked them whether they have read a book called Peace by Strength or something like that. And you wouldn't believe it. I mean, they all have read it. So it is not something, you know, what we are talking about that is specific of the uneducated. And I think that what you need in order to understand the world, grasp an ideology, and then make the kind of specifications and re-specifications from abstract principles that you easily understand. Okay, I stop, but I have to say that I've really enjoyed the talk so much as yours lately.
André, please.
Yeah, I'll be short because I see there's 3 more hands. Okay, so apologies, yes. Professor Klingemann, that I won't answer all in detail. I'll answer this. So that ambiguity is interesting because we asked for dogmatism. So to ask the opposite would be an interesting suggestion. So I'm gonna talk to my colleagues to do that in the next study. We do actually have some data in countries with a very weak left-right dimension. So for example, Romania. So we can actually do that. What I find interesting in this centrism, so I always say there's 2 kinds of centrism. It's people who are always moderate. So you ask them any question and they sort of doubt and they stay in center and have more. But you can also end up in the center when you have very conflicting, inconsistent beliefs, right? You want basically left and right wing things. You could also say that's a sort of centrist, balanced position. So. And
the Marais is.
And I think those types of centrism might also be an explanation for this bubble in the center where you see this conspiratorial beliefs, because it's basically people holding extreme but inconsistent beliefs in terms of left-right ideology, and that also is fascinating me. Your core of your argument is in ideology and sort of the supply side. Ideologies are basically expectations about the world or explanations about the world, and how do they work then with conspiracy belief. And it's true we used ideologies as a predictor of who would be the bad guy and girl. Mm-hmm. And so our idea was that for the left it's bankers and CEOs and large companies, and for the right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we do use ideology, but you're right, we can dig deeper there. Last point, and then we'll go to the next question, is that's very interesting, this idea of highly educated versus lower educated conspiratorial belief. And like I said, we find this in minority, higher educated, completely conspiratorial with a good story on why they are so stressed about society. But we also find a lot of highly intelligent people, dedicated people who believe in conspiracy and do everything to prove it. The problem is that their evidence is always in line with what they want to find. So they don't ask the question, what evidence do I need to be wrong? They only find evidence that corroborates what they already think. So it's the wrong type of research. But there's a lot of people who do a lot of research, and it's very difficult to tell them that they're wrong because they have an answer to everything. They've researched it. They have a whole story for everything you tell them. And it's fascinating how well thought through their nonsense is. It's really amazing. It's very difficult to reason against it because they have very good, well thought, intelligent explanations for everything. The problem is that it's often very difficult to actually find real evidence for the claims that they make. So it's a lot of claims, unsubstantiated claims that they make in order to get to their truth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anne-Catherine hands was up first. Next, so please.
Okay. Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, André. It was really interesting, and I think this is something that has puzzled us for a long time, and of course recently with the pandemic, when we saw different groups going together protesting about the lockdowns and vaccines and everything. So therefore I thought the idea that you find conspirational ideas both among different ideological backgrounds is really fruitful and interesting. I have 2 questions. I mean, you had a question about, is there some kind of personality types that are more prone to conspirational thinking? But I started thinking that if you go a step further, I mean, we have different types of trends in society. I mean, with more rationalization, individualization, at the same time as we have a disbelief in different types of old authorities like the church. We don't believe in ideologies anymore. Is there anything there to get out why we see this type of conspiracy? Because we should believe that people are more rational nowadays. I mean, we have a lot of information. On the same time, we stress the individualism, that we can think by himself. And we think about with the Lutheran Church, and you can understand the Bible, the word of the Bible by yourself. Is there anything there you could think about? I mean, why we see this? I mean, people are more independent of old authorities, and now they think by themselves. And why so? Is there anything in those trends? And my second question is, I mean, the role of the media today. I mean, we think about the media structure. It was kind of very controlled. You had public media, or you had a media structure that was connected to certain interests. And now we have a much more complex media structure, and you have, of course, a lot of media outlets that are producing conspiracy theories and presenting conspiracy theories, as in the States. Really, I mean, Fox News, but then we have on specific topics like anti-vaxxers and other things. So I do think that in a way is kind of underblowing. And have you studied, I mean, there were questions about different types of societies, if they are more prone to conspiracy theories, but do you see a connection between the media outlet, and you have a lot of media that are spreading conspiracies? The questions.
André?
Yes, apologies for not taking too long on these answers, because we want to have all the questions in. But so there's very interesting evidence that's starting with the media outlets, that some media outlets' information actually eradicate knowledge. And so there's evidence, for example, that people unlearn what they learn in school in the United States if they watch a lot of Fox News. So they less know about the political system that they learned in school when they watch a lot of Fox News, because they misunderstand now their own political system, because Fox News tells lies about how the system works. And so there is absolutely a sort of impact on certain information that eradicates logic thinking and actual knowledge in societies. And this has to do, I think, with the fact, and this is what we're so interested in this cognitive element, is this truth relativism. And now you have people very easily saying, no, but this is my opinion. And so they claim equality of quality of information just because it's their opinion. And this is, I think, a result of individualism, that automatically, because you think it's worth equal to an academic study. And I often have this when I put my academic study online on Twitter. People say that's not true because I know this. And then they are like, it's their opinion in 2 minutes is equal worth to my 5 years of researching something. And so I think the fact that online information, that increasingly information online, there's no filter, there's no measurement of quality, there's no redaction, there's a lot of stuff out there that's total nonsense, but it's in the same orbit as high quality information. And I think it unlearns people on what good quality information is and what truth is. And so I don't want to be totally negative and dystopian, but it's not good for society that we don't agree anymore on facts and what actually is knowledge.
And we only have 5 minutes left, so if I could ask Radek, before I ask you, I would like to express my concern for you, because you look the same color as your wall, which is not encouraging.
The minor thing, the big issue here is that it is a conspiracy. I have only 3 minutes, you know. I mean, how can't you believe? I mean, even the machine is, erasing me from the discussion. Anyway, I have three minor things at the beginning. Some of them were already raised. I will just ask short questions and then go to one that I think is important. You, first of all, congratulations, great job. But in one of the papers, you started with saying conspiracy belief. How serious are you about that it is a belief? You know, there are opinions, attitudes, back to Campbell, Converse, early works. I mean, there has been a lot of stuff has to be to prove that it's a true belief system that is with us even across our lifetime and so on and so forth. That's one. The second is about this curvilinearity of the left and right. And this is, it was raised already about the ontology of the center. Yeah? The center either is something ontologically different from left and right, or it is stuffed, as typically it is, with all those non-engaged, non-informed people who simply do not dare answer, don't know, or whatnot, and they are ending up in the middle of the scale. On top of that, because you have a multinational study, let me remind you, there are countries that are less rational than Holland, that up to 20%. No, I'm serious.
I know. You're from one of those countries.
These Catholics here, really, the miracles they believe in, I can entertain you. But anyway, my point is that up to 20% for reasons that are not only to be, up to 20% simply cannot self-place themselves on the left and right axis. Yeah? Now, one of the things that I would be really curious to learn is whether there is much more of a simple variance analysis, whether there is much more within country or between country differences in this respect. I was unable to follow exactly the cases, but I think this is important. And of course, if somebody already mentioned this, I would very much like to see how this whole story works with the Rotter scale of locus of control, external, internal, and political efficacy. And finally, you know, the big thing about the context. Yeah, this beautiful Oxford handbook that starts with the words, "It depends." It depends on the context. Yeah. And let me give you an example. So it clearly is, I'm living in Poland, you know, this peripheral strange place in Eastern Europe. And up to recently, if I were asked whether they are surveilling me and listening to what I would say, no. But then 2 years ago, it turned out that the Pegasus scandal popped up. So it turned out I'm not qualified enough to answer this kind of questions. Yeah. I don't want to take too much time, but there were also politicians who were involved in such surveillance scandals. And then when they went to the police department to renew their permit for a gun, they were asked this question, you know, by psychologists. Do you have the feeling that somebody is listening to you when you talk over the phone? I mean, come on. Of course they are. I mean, so it's a very, very tricky thing these days in non-fully democratic countries to be accused or not accused of being a carrier of conspiratory beliefs or not. Sometimes they turn out to be true. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Radek. André?
Yeah, so for us also a conspiracy belief, so it doesn't, we don't say that all these things that we believe are not true, because we can also not know, because there's a lot of things that they claim. We just say conspiracy belief is something that you think that's a group behind there colluding against you, and you don't need evidence, you just know that it is without needing the evidence for it. That's the conspiracy belief. And how deep is that belief? It's true, and we think, so we call it belief because we think it's really not only a mindset, but also a relatively coherent worldview. So they see the world as really far more threatening, and certain groups as far more threatening towards them or their group or their nation. But that can shift, because in Poland, for example, we saw that previously The right wing was far more conspiratorial. And since PIS has come in power, we see that the left wing has become very, very conspiratorial. In Spain, the same thing. Also there, because of the power shifts, you see that people have become different, sort of the high level of conspiracy moves basically tilts to the other side because of this locus of control of the political power and particularly of a lot of scandals that sometimes emerge in political systems. And so it's not static that it's always the right wing, it's always the same group. It really depends indeed also on the power structures. It depends on the crisis that you see. I'm sure now, and we're already testing this, there's going to be a lot of conspiratorial beliefs about Putin, about the Wagner Group. There was never so much. There's going to be 1,000 Wagner Group conspiracy beliefs and connecting to everything. Believe me, you don't need to wait. They're already out there. And so, yes, it depends, and context matters. Within country versus cross-country variation is also very interesting because we find this within country variation is huge between specific groups in terms of how their society, relative position in society, but also background, religious background, cultural background. Some groups are far more prone also to believe that the whole system is rigged against them. For example, the black community in the United States has real fear that they're being targeted by the government. And the government has targeted them in the past, right? Even with introducing illness into their community. So yes, they're far more conspiratorial. Maybe for a reason, maybe not. And so the within country variation, I would say, is actually very, very large. So not say larger than within country, but yeah, I would say within larger than across.
Thank you very much. The hands are still up there, but I think the questions have already been asked, unless there is another question from Hans-Dieter Yilmaz or Anne-Catherine. No. Okay, I thought so. You forgot to switch off the yellow hands. André, this was an extremely informative, exciting presentation. We all enjoyed it very much. We have learned a lot. And I hope that we can continue this conversation in South Africa, because I believe you want to come here.
Yes, exactly. This is my only complaint, is why are we online? But I want to thank Damien for initiating this, Ursula, with you together. You conspired against us all to organize this, so that's very, very nice. And let's conspire again and then actually do this like physically coming together.
Right. I'm not going to conspire against you the next time, but for you. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Thank you all for joining in. I think we all have enjoyed it and learned a lot. So I wish you a good night. And I also want to remind you, there's time to have a glass of wine.
Will do. Okay, thanks very much.
Ciao.
Ciao. Thanks very much. Thanks, Damien,
and
again.
Damien, thank you as well.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.